Cosmic Geppetto podcast is brought to you by MuseGuitarist.com. For help creating your own amazing music, from advice, production, or awesome guitar work, contact Brad Hewitt at admin@MuseGuitarist.com or visit www.museguitarist.com. From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host. To be the podcast, you gotta beat the podcast. Woo! Brad Mendenhall.
Hey everybody, it is an extreme episode of the Cosmic Geppetto podcast. Kyle Crane is back to talk about the end, again, of the XFL. But first, it is an interesting time to be a fan of really dark adult cartoons. Sunday, May 3rd, Rick and Morty return to the Adult Swim Network for the second half of Season 4. These episodes should be enjoyed because after these 5, history tells us it could be 2 years before the show returns. In a few days, Solar Opposites drops on Hulu. It's familiar. Justin Roiland, one of the co-creators of Rick and Morty, is responsible for the new series, along with Mike McMahon, who was one of the show's head writers. Roiland also voices main character Corvo, who sounds a lot like Rick Sanchez. Now, I like Rick and Morty a lot. It is funny and unapologetically brutal. It also sometimes can be a bit much. I'm glad they have short seasons because 22 episodes of unrelenting black comedy would wear me out. So, a second show with the same bleak viewpoint might be a bit much. Don't get me wrong, I'll watch it. I just might need to rewatch Parks and Rec for a mental sorbet afterwards. So excited. He teased us a couple episodes back because he shared what was how he and his lovely wife have been keeping busy during the clean version of how they've been keeping busy during the quarantine. Kyle Crane is back. Kyle, how you doing?
I'm doing, all things considered, pretty good, Brad. Thanks for having me back on the Cosmic Geppetto podcast.
When was last we had a conversation? You've been nice enough to sort of provide some content here or there, but us actually talking, it's been a year, hasn't it?
It's been at least a year. In fact, I thought I wanted to look this up ahead of time, but the last conversation we had, I know we had one about the XFL, and then we had one about the King of Comedy. We kind of talked about that. And then I'm trying to remember, I think I might have done another appearance since then, but it's definitely been a year plus since I have been a guest on the show, and it's been too long.
Well, I was so glad that you were able to come back because you're right. We had a conversation when they announced the rejuvenation, if you will, of the XFL, and we were like, well, how's this going to work? And turns out it didn't work great.
For a minute there, it looked like things were going to do fine. It actually, we can get into this a little bit as we're talking here, but things were looking pretty promising there at the very beginning, and then, full-blown economic collapse.
It was getting decent reviews.
Right.
And I actually saw somebody get excited about it. I remember the first game of the season, I went into my local AT&T store. I had to exchange a phone. They had the game on in the background on the big high definition screen TV. One of the guys who worked there was really excited because it was a New York team. It was like, oh, I'm just excited to see a New York football team that's doing well. How many games did they have? What, 5 or 6 games?
It went for 5 weeks, but then I believe, let's see, so each week they had 4 games. So we've got, so was it 4 times 5? About almost 20 games, I think, before it finally closed. So a fair amount in there. I mean, considering it was around for such a very, very short time.
the ratings and everything were what they needed to be. I think there was a couple of players who were starting to get a little bit of buzz, because a league like that, what it really needs is you need star players. You need players who people sort of gravitate towards and get interested in. You need teams that people like. And you were starting to just get a little bit of that. I think the league hurt because it didn't – some of the big free agents, for lack of a better term, that are out there that would have had some name value is Johnny Manziel and Colin Kaepernick, neither of whom signed on for myriads of reasons and different reasons for each of them. So they weren't able to get that automatic name value. But the football was apparently the football was decent. They were getting some people with a little bit of buzz. And then COVID-19 hit, and it went real bad from there. Yes.
Yeah, it went pretty much non-existent from there. They immediately said that, hey, we're suspending the rest of the season. And I think there were, some people making some jokes at that point. Like, of course, the first season was going to go this way, but things looked promising enough. And the ratings were actually pretty good, especially the first 3 weeks. They were doing really well, that people were kind of like, oh, this might actually carry on. End of the season happens early. Nobody really blames them. And then out of nowhere, not only is the season done, there's not going to be a next season. It is done. They have closed up shop and everything has gone away now. COVID-19, as it could have just kneecapped them for the 2020 season. It's just nothing but a dream in Vince McMahon's septuagenarian mind at this point.
And they declared bankruptcy, so people are going to be losing a lot of money.
They're going to be losing a lot of money, and on top of that, McMahon himself has really lost a lot of value in this whole thing. So apparently what happened was in late March, he started loaning money to the XFL. I think he loaned something like $12.5 million over the course of 3 different payments to the XFL. And what that did is, even though he's the guy who runs the company, it made him a creditor for the company. Now, this is beside the fact that I think he sold, I give the actual number here, $379,658,303 worth of WWE stock to start up the XFL, because it looked like the thing was going to be losing money for 3 years. So he kind of pocketed that ahead of time. Well, on top of that, this $12.5 million additional he gave them, he became a creditor to the company, meaning that when the company closed down, he could actually start selling off its assets himself personally. So it looks like he's things like merchandising, different sort of like camera equipment, balls, hats, jerseys, things like that. Now he can sell them to a European Football League team or Canadian or college or something like that. So that is pretty shady. And then also the fact that it looks like they are going to be stiffing all sorts of business partners like merchandising, like I think the company that makes the hats for them and Ticketmaster, they're going to be owed a bunch of money and declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy and backing out on it if they owed like $50 million worth of that, and it's just something they don't have to pay anymore. I don't think there will ever be a third incarnation of the XFL after this, because I don't know who in their right mind would want to go into business with the McMahon family after the way that they treated everybody on this.
Many, many moons ago, when you and I first talked about this, it was a Hail Mary at that time, and it was so weird because the XFL was a damaged brand. It ran for 1 season, got lousy ratings, got lousy reviews. People didn't like the football. Credit given, they did survive a full season, and my memory is they could have gotten a second season, but they were going to have to make some concessions that Vince McMahon wasn't willing to make to get a second season to happen.
Yeah. But they were, for a while, they looked like they were going to do the second season, that it was ready to go, until it wasn't.
And I remember what really started the interest in what started conversation is there was a great 30 for 30 special on ESPN about the XFL, about their 1 season. And they interviewed Vince McMahon, which is always hilarious. Him being interviewed by anyone outside of his world, because you could see he doesn't do well being interviewed by real journalists, because he's too used to controlling his own world. I mean, there was one, they showed him smacking I remember one interview, I don't think it was involved with the XFL, but he was being interviewed, and he smacked a paper out of the interviewer's hands.
Yes, yeah. You can see definitely where the mind that is producing a fake product all the time and has to live in that carny world where they have to keep it up all the time. When you're sitting there with a real journalist who's firing real questions off, all of a sudden he gets really defensive over even the smallest thing. And it's like, we're not talking to a human being here. We're talking to a facsimile. We're talking to the character, Mr. McMahon, and not Vincent Kennedy McMahon, who owns Alpha Entertainment LLC. And like you're saying, it's a surreal experience to see that.
And now he's 74. I just looked up. He's 74 years old. This was it. This was his Hail Mary. This was his attempt to sort of try to get rid of a blemish that's on his record. It was either this or try the World Bodybuilding Federation again, and that ain't going to happen.
Yeah. Bring Ico Pro back out. Yeah.
Vince McMahon, and the history of him is so fascinating because his father was a wrestling producer, Vince McMahon Sr. He bought it. He tells stories about him and his wife, Linda, who's now part of the Trump's cabinet. There's a whole source of craziness with that. They lived in a trailer home, and he would talk about like mainly pumping the septic out of his trailer home. And he's a billionaire. He is a billionaire with a $1 billion company that he still runs in so many ways like a scumbag carny.
You nailed it. They still do business that way. And, recently they've got this very controversial deal going on with the Prince of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where they're doing like 2 shows or 3 shows or 4 shows. I can't remember how many ever it is per year, but they're getting paid a lot of money to do that. Well, the prince didn't pay them what they were owed, and they started doing one of their shows, and Vince immediately called for the satellite feed to be pulled on it. So if you're watching on the WWE network, nothing was wrong. But if you were watching in like a home in Saudi Arabia or something like that, all of a sudden the signal just went blank. And he's basically like, well, we're not putting the signal back on until we get our money, which you can't do to the guy who had a kill team take out Jamal Khashoggi. That's not something that happened. So the prince turned around and wouldn't let them fly out of Saudi Arabia until the whole thing got sorted out. But he's trying to do these carny tactics with one of the most wealthy and dangerous people in the entire world. Somehow they were able to work all that stuff out. But the Prince Mohammed bin Saladin's not the kind of guy I would play games with like that. But again, in his mind, it's okay to carny like that. It's so bizarre.
It's impossible to know, obviously. But if COVID-19 hadn't happened, if the XFL had been able to complete their season, what do you think would have been the future for that organization 1 year from now and 5 years from now?
So I think it would have continued. I don't think it ever would have broken through to be like this huge thing that was going to sell out stadiums and stuff like that. I think it always would have been a nice alternative in the spring to the NFL. If you're a huge football fan and you enjoyed the Super Bowl, all of a sudden a few weeks later, you've got the XFL coming along. And if the games had continued along the quality that they had been, it would have probably been a profitable company. And when we talked about this 2 years ago, one thing that didn't occur to me at the time and became apparent maybe a year later was that live sports is really the future of TV being like an over-the-air broadcast type thing, because it's really the least DVRable product that's out there. If you want to stay current, if you want to watch the exciting stuff like football, basketball, baseball, all that stuff, you have to watch it live. Just so happened that kind of occurred to me a year later when all of a sudden the WWE signed like a multi-billion-dollar contract with Fox to put SmackDown, their Friday night show, on Fox's network channel. Which was kind of crazy at the time because the ratings weren't that high, but Fox saw a lot of value in having something live. And later, AEW, the new wrestling federation, which I think is fantastic, they got a great deal on TNT, and now they're rolling into a new deal. They're almost instantly profitable because, again, it's the kind of stuff that you can't really DVR. You got to watch it live. So I think that the XFL probably would have continued to be profitable 5 years in the future, like you're asking. I don't think that they ever get as big as the NFL. I think that was a pipe dream in McMahon's head since the beginning, but I think a very good first place spring football league was conceivable, could have happened. And if we really had not had COVID-19, I think that, the ratings would have declined. They were on a downward slope, but it was still not that bad. The ratings were still pretty good. Like by the third week, they were still pulling in like 2 million viewers and like 1 million on FS1, which of course is of the 4 networks they were on, are ABC, Fox, FS1, ESPN. FS1 is definitely the lowest of all of those. So if you're still playing in 1 million people for a game on FS1 on like a Sunday, that's still pretty good for a spring football league. So I would have continued to see this thing. I think they probably would have expanded, added a few more teams, maybe rounded it out. I think they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 teams right now. So maybe if they added another 10 over a 5-year period, the XFL could have maintained a spring-summer league that I think a lot of people who were into like college football would have watched to kind of tide them over the whole time. And then nobody saw COVID-19 coming to this degree a year ago. So I think that this is really the one stumbling block which they just could not get over. I think a lot of that has to do with what we were talking about, that live sports being a thing 2 years ago when he announced the XFL, what kind of made it a sellable product. If this thing continues on for the next 18 months, like people are saying that the COVID-19 social distancing and, quarantine and stuff like that could possibly do, recovering sports is going to be very, very, very difficult unless you're something like college football or the NBA or the NFL or the NHL or something like that. I think we're going to see this hit a lot of these smaller leagues harder. In the XFL, they probably would not have been able to recover from this if they had tried to move the spring season over to 2021 or 2022. I don't think they have the money to make it to that point with no revenue coming in. So yeah, to answer your question, I think it would have gotten bigger. 5 years, I think probably would have seen 20 teams, and maybe this thing, like February to June, July, however long the season lasts, I think it probably would have been a really good staple hold for those seasons.
When the XFL happened the first time, Vince McMahon presented it as, I don't like what football's become, what the NFL's become. He wanted to go back to football's roots and more of a hard-hitting style, and was very much challenging football, challenging the NFL. And he definitely didn't have that feel this time. God only knows what's going on with his head full of cast and rocking chairs. But at least with publicly presenting, it's like, hey, we want to be a little bit of a feeder league. We want to find those players that slipped through the cracks, which the XFL did well. In that one season, Tommy Maddox was the MVP of their only season, and he ended up getting signed by the Steelers afterwards, and had a nice little backup quarterback career, and which is a great way to make a living.
Oh yeah,
the XFL looked like it could have been that way. I know there are players. As soon as they announced the end of the season, I think even before they declared bankruptcy, USA Today and other newspapers and sites and magazines were saying, it's like, hey, these are the 10 XFL players that should get interest from the NFL. You could see that becoming sort of their bread and butter. It's like, okay, every year the XFL would have a season. After the season, it's like, okay, who did well enough that they're going to catch interest from the NFL, and they get signed. They get signed because every NFL team needs to have, I think, 52 players. They're always going to need somebody. They're always going to need a warm body. You could always have the Kurt Warner thing, where Kurt Warner, before he had a Hall of Fame NFL career, Kurt Warner played in NFL Europe and in a indoor football league. You never know when an XFL player who sort of slipped through, played for a smaller college, and is able to impress people and get signed in the NFL, and all of a sudden have a Pro Bowl caliber season or two. That could get interest. And also the reverse can happen, where every season the XFL could have had a thing of like, these are the NFL players who have been let go, who are looking for that second chance. And it could be a popular player. What was the he plays baseball now. He was the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback who had a terrible who the way he threw made him an awful NFL player. He played for Denver, and then he bounced around as a trying to catch on with a couple of teams. Tim Tebow.
Oh, Tebow. Yeah. I could totally see Tebow coming back here with any one of these teams, or could have. Yeah.
That was the sort of player that could do really well in the XFL. Somebody who had a great college career, charismatic, and is beloved. And the XFL would have a thing where college players, the way their draft worked, it was set up so teams in certain areas would have first dibs on players who play in that area. So Tim Tebow could have caught on with the local team closest to where he played for college. And then, boom, you have automatic interest because, hey, he's not good enough to play in the NFL. He just isn't. But he has a certain amount of celebrity. So it would have been interesting in 5 years if they could have gotten that Tebow-esque player who, yeah, we get a chance to see him play football at a good level, and the celebrity factor. Because I know Tebow's been playing for the Mets. He's not a very good baseball player. He's never going to make it as a major leaguer. But because of his celebrity factor, his minor league baseball teams have really high attendance because people want to see Tebow.
Right, kind of a cult of personality type thing. We're here for Tebow more than we are for the Mets.
Theoretically, XFL could have done something like that. And you're right, it's never going to be Super Bowl. It's never going to be competitive with the NFL, but it could have made money.
On top of that, too, one of the things Vince did when he restarted the XFL, he founded a new company, and we'll get into this in a second, Alpha Entertainment LLC. And the idea was that maybe Alpha Entertainment, if the XFL does well, they can maybe give some competition to the UFC. They could do things that were not sports entertainment or wrestling related, because deep down inside, it's been noted by a lot of people. I'm not the first one to say this. Vince actually hates professional wrestling. He wants to be seen as doing something bigger than that. They have the saying in the WWE, like, well, we don't have wrestlers, we have superstars. We're not doing wrestling, we're making movies, is this thing they say over and over again. We're making movies. And they have a movie division. He's really lost interest in the wrestling thing. So this Alpha Entertainment could have been the way that they broke through, and whatever they did with the XFL, if that worked, they take that and they turn it into mixed martial arts, or they turn it into, I don't know, baseball, or, underwater basket weaving or whatever. But now that's not going to be, because Alpha Entertainment has declared bankruptcy.
Did you ever see the documentary Beyond the Mat?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Saw it in the theater, actually. Yeah.
Fascinating documentary. And they had an interview with Vince McMahon, and he said that line is like, we're making movies. And he was so smug, was such an ass.
People have said for the longest time he resents wrestling, that they think they should be bigger than professional wrestling. And at one point, they should have sold the company if that's what he wanted to do. And then he should have gone into, film production or something like that. But he didn't, because he's a control freak. I've heard some people who have worked in the company interviewed, and they've said, well, he considers himself like the Walt Disney, whereas Walt Disney at one point was doing cartoons and then live action and then theme parks. Walt Disney was never satisfied with that. He wanted to do the next thing. And by the time he passed away, he was actually working on civic planning with the experimental prototype, the City of Tomorrow in Florida. And then he passed away. People said that he was completely bored with theme parks at that point and wanted to get into transportation and solving all these city problems. Well, Vince is kind of the same way. He sees himself as Walt Disney. He refers to himself as Walt Disney. But the problem is, Walt Disney at some point gave up control over the things he was not great at. He wasn't the best animator, so he hired iWorks and all these guys who were great animators to do his stuff. Vince has to keep control on everything. And that's why you hear writers, they hire all these writers from TV shows like The Big Bang Theory or Community or something like that to come on and write TV for them. And Vince will get them in there, show up 2 hours late to a writer's meeting, and then take every idea that everybody throws out and just throw it out the window and rewrite the show himself. And it's almost like this just kind of like a grudge war between him and the people that he hires. Yeah, that whole smug looking into the camera, like, well, we're making movies. It's like, no, you're not. You're making professional wrestling. There's an audience for that. Give the people what they want. There's an audience for the spring football,
We had, years ago, we had Dave Lagana on, who was a writer he wrote for Friends. He was in the writer's rooms for the TV show Friends, one of the biggest, most popular show during its creative peak. And then he went and he wrote for Vince McMahon and was like the lead writer for SmackDown. It just broke his spirit. And then he did a podcast called, I forget what it was, but Lagana had his own podcast. He would talk with a bunch of other writers. And again, people with pretty impressive resumes. They talked about what you're saying. It's like, yeah, McMahon would show up real late. They would pitch stuff to him. He would toss all of it out the window, or then they would accept stuff. They had 2 shows on every week that are 2 to 3 hours long. And then right before, he would throw everything out the window, like just completely wasting all their efforts.
Yeah. Some of the most talented writers in Hollywood that could be making money anywhere, and they chose to go with this thing they have a passion for, professional wrestling. And the thing I've heard from a lot of people that work there is that it completely kills your passion for that.
McMahon, 74 years old. He doesn't think he's going to die. The man is a lunatic.
I truly think that is death is not. I think if he thinks that the actual Grim Reaper comes into his room at night to finally take him, he could throw him down and take his scythe and become death incarnate himself. You look at a guy like that, kind of this Ubermensch type person who has turned themselves into the Superman. Well, they're kind of right in a way. He's won just about every fight he's ever been in. I mean, to a degree, the first XFL and this one, or 2 fights he did not win. But you kind of see how eventually he buys into that own worldview that he's created of himself, that he really is not going to die. 75 is going to come and he'll be fine. 76 is going to come and he'll be a little bit less. But I truly think that what you just said is his honest opinion of himself, that he will live forever.
He actually said that in an interview. I forget what it was, but maybe it was a 10-year-old interview. I forget where it was. It was ESPN or someone is talking about how much influence he has, and are you ever going to retire? Are you ever going to sell? He's like, no, I'm always going to be in charge. He's like, well, what happens when you leave this? And he's like, well, I'm never going to sell this. I'm never going to leave this. And then the interviewer is like, what happens if you die? And he's like, I just don't see that happening. He's like, what the hell?
Of course he doesn't. He's bought into his own gimmick. And I know they have a succession plan in place where I think his daughter, Stephanie McMahon, would take over the business side of everything, and his son-in-law, Triple H, would be the booker for everything, I think, as things stand right now. But they actually fired the heads of the company, the 2 CEOs, I think sometime last month. There was a lot of questioning like, well, why did you do this? These were the people that came in and wanted to create the WWE network and everything. And it was just like, oh, we were trying to go in a different direction with everything. And it might be because they were probably part of the succession plan, that they might actually see, get the control once Vince passes away and kick the McMahon family out for good. But any publicly traded company, that's a possibility. They've got, I think, a call coming up next week. Shareholders have to vote on that kind of stuff. It's Vince thinks that he is the end all of this whole thing, but it's actually the shareholders that get to make that call.
Well, that's another interesting thing about the cult of personality around Vince McMahon and the XFL and WWE and the company that, and was it Titan Sports is the company that he actually runs?
Yes.
It's a publicly traded company where the face of the company, the brains behind it, is this crazy 74-year-old man without, I don't know if he has I don't think he has a college education. I'm not sure he has a high school education. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
The stories that come out about this organization are insane. There was just a news thing about a young woman, Amy Weber. Have you heard about this?
I don't think so.
Amy Weber, very pretty young woman who was one of the divas, especially, and this was during the 90s era where they were doing very much more adult content. She was she was in the Diva Search and left the organization because she was being harassed by the male performers. And she just recently released a video on her own YouTube channel saying that the reason she left is she was on a flight and Randy Orton, one of the performers, while she was sleeping on the plane, he rammed his shoulder into her seat to knock her off the seat and then said, "You'll learn." And then one of the other performers, Adam Copeland Edge, poured a drink on her while she tried to get back to sleep. She just got off the plane and was like, "I quit. I can't deal with this." Because she was like a model. She was a very pretty woman who was a model who decided she was going to try to do this because you never know who's going to become Stacy Keibler, who went from being a cheerleader for the Baltimore Ravens to sign up to join the world of wrestling. Not that she had any interest in it, but because it was a way to be on TV every week. And then she got cast on Dancing with the Stars, and then she dated George Clooney for 3 years.
Yeah, she did pretty well for herself. Yeah. Yeah, that's that kind of mentality that they have there and they have in the wrestling business, is that everybody has to pay their dues and has to respect the business. And it comes down to this real kind of like frat boy mentality. And that might even be insulting to frat boys, because some of the stuff they do allegedly is really despicable and disgusting. But in their mind, it's weeding out the people who are just trying to be leeches on the company. They don't really respect the business. And I don't think you could walk into any other business in the entire world, where I work. You don't do that. Every place you work at, you are part of a team. And when you go into a place, it's like, we want you to be part of us. We want to all work together. It's not like I'm never looking at some new person and being like, well, how can I get this person to leave? But that's the kind of, I heard someone say one time, imagine being so insecure that you had to put on 300 pounds of muscle and work out every day. Like, that's the kind of like insecurity about everybody's place they have there, and kind of the culture of that company that has been cultivated by the McMahons. It's funny because we got on here. I wanted to see what people who, since the XFL just went under, I wanted to see what people who worked there had to say about it. So I went into Glassdoor and took a look at it, and the XFL actually has a 5 out of 5 rating. I think there was like 1 person out of 10 interviewed that had anything negative to say about it at all. And I understand where they're coming from. Everybody else is like, oh, it was fun while it lasted. Had a really good time. Paid well. It was a fun job to work at. But the WWE has 249 reviews and has a 3.5 out of 5. And it's just, most of the reviews are like, it's like working in kindergarten. It's like they paid me well, but treated me like crap to make up for it. I feel very sorry for Amy having to put up with that kind of stuff, because there's, again, I'm sure it's like this where you work too. Could you imagine like having your boss or your coworkers try to say like, well, let's, the new person over there, let's, make them pay their dues.
Weber talked before years ago, a different story, like somebody didn't like her, so they defecated in her gym bag. Like, apparently that's just a thing that they do in that world. It's like, all right, we're going to teach them. I know Mike Mizanin, who's a pro wrestler, who's pretty successful. He talked about early in his career, they hazed him. He was known for, he had been on The Real World. And he even talked about when he was on The Real World that he was a big pro wrestling fan, and basically took his fame and used that to catapult himself into popularity as a wrestler. He wasn't very well liked because everyone thought he was just a reality show guy. And it's not inaccurate. A reality show guy who used that to become a wrestler. they forced him out of the locker room and he had to get dressed in the restroom in the venues where he performed.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. And again, this is a publicly traded company.
It's insane.
When I asked you on, I wanted to talk about XFL. I really wasn't planning on talking about wrestling because it's something that we don't do on this show very often. We have, because sometimes wrestling does sort of bleed into general pop culture. I mean, the president of this country is in the WWE Hall of Fame, so there is crossover. But Vince McMahon, aside from the XFL, has been in the news in really terrible ways the last few days.
Yes, it has. It's funny that we're doing this the week that we are, because it has been a very bad news week because of actions that they have brought upon themselves.
First off, the training facility for the WWE is located in Florida. It's called the Performance Center. If people aren't familiar, normally WWE broadcasts their shows live from stadiums all across the country. And they decided, because of COVID-19, they now broadcast from the Performance Center, basically where they train young wrestlers to sort of learn their style, learn the craft. Florida, like everything else, there's no big events like that are going on. Like baseball, hockey, basketball, they're all shut down. And they were going to do the same thing. And then they got the state to declare them, what's the term they keep using?
Essential business, I think.
Yeah, they have been declared an essential business. Like hospitals and grocery stores. Pro wrestling is also.
Nakedly just corrupt. Linda McMahon, like we said, I think she's the head of Trump's Small Business Council, which is hilarious because the only reason she's involved with business with the WWE is because she was made the CEO of the company during the steroid trial that they had in I think it's late 80s, early 90s, something like that. Like Vince was involved in the whole thing, so he had to step aside and they put Linda in the position. So she is not really it's not like she built this company from the ground up. And it's not a small business either. So the whole thing is just so sketchy. And they've been trying to get her into politics for years. They put a ton of money into her personal campaign in Connecticut that never...
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
And she didn't win. Last week, they made... I don't have the number in front of me. I thought I had it, but for some reason I deleted it from my notes. Something like $13 million that they gave to Florida. And then all of a sudden, they're declared an essential business. And prior to this, Orange County, which is where the Performance Center is, was trying to get them shut down. I think they had something like 7 run-ins with the law where they were like, no, you guys have got people in this ring sweating all the time. These people have been working out all the time. Their heart rates are up. If one of these people got COVID-19, it could be a disaster for you. And in fact, a member of the production staff did get COVID-19. We don't know who it is yet, but it looks like they actually got it after they had been in contact for, I think, WrestleMania. And they were taking some time off and then got it at that point. So I don't think anybody in the facility got it, but if somebody did, that'd be terrible. They made this $13 million dedication of money to Florida, and then all of a sudden they're declared an essential business by the governor DeSantis. The reason that they say they're an essential business, or that the governor of Florida did, they're bringing in money to the state. No, they're not. There's no audiences going to this thing. They're not actually holding a live event for anything. There's no money coming in. They're spending some money on electricity and stuff like that, but that's negligible. They're not really putting money into... Their wrestlers aren't going out to local restaurants because those are closed as well. So it's just this naked way of trying to get around the whole thing. And I mean, it's perfect playing into this whole carny thing that McMahon has been doing for years, but it's just nakedly corrupt. Nakedly corrupt.
When the last thing that you knew, he was walking out on you, to the port of no return, where I found you.
To make it even worse, then they fired dozens of people. From performers to writers to producers, and basically for financial reasons. But what was it? I'm going to be a little sloppy with the exact numbers, but my understanding is they basically have a fund of $500 million to help them get through this, and the salaries of the people they fired come up to $4 million.
Yeah, it was just a profit margin type thing. I think the $500 million is broken down to $91 million of that's actually cash, and the rest is credit or something that they could liquidate. But $500 million some walking around money. They aren't hurting for anything. And on top of that, I want to say it's Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer noted that if they don't do a single live show for the rest of this year, because of the Saudi deal, the Fox deal, the network, everything else, they're going to bring in $75 million without running another show for the entire time if things just coasted along. So this whole thing was like, I think we're going to see, and I think we talked a little bit about this before the show started, about some industries just completely folding.
Some industries are going to fold, but wrestling isn't one of them.
They'll be around for a while. Yeah. And now all of a sudden they've got something like 20 wrestlers and trainers and writers they've furloughed and everything. And a lot of these wrestlers are usually they'd be able to jump to another company, but the other companies aren't running right now. So a lot of these guys who've been with them for a while just have nothing else to do. There's this one wrestler, his name's Drake Maverick, and he wrestled in Impact Wrestling as a guy named Rockstar Spud. And if you have a chance, check out his Instagram. He has a video up where he's really emotionally saying like, look, this was my life dream. It's not panning out right now. I think they're letting him do a couple more matches next week, and then he's got nothing after that. And it shows the human toll that this whole thing has taken. And when you look at the fact that they've got so much money on hand, they're still going to have money coming in. You would think that these are the kind of people that a company would want to protect and especially keep around, because some of them were some pretty big names, especially in Japan, in a wrestling organization over there that could actually prove to be some competition for the WWE. It'd probably be better to keep some of these guys just sitting at home collecting a paycheck and working out and keeping in shape than possibility to lose them to the enemy, which that may very well be the case very soon.
I saw a video from the What Culture Wrestling, which has a good group of guys that talk about this very intelligently, and they said a lot of the people let go, that's what they were doing anyway. They were sort of had these people on contract to keep them from going elsewhere.
That's what the WWE's modus operandi has been the last couple of years. They will get the hottest person in Japan, the guy named Shinsuke Nakamura, they brought up from Japan, and then didn't use him at all. Why? Because he's better as a quiver, as an arrow in your quiver, as opposed to the other guys. Even if you don't use him, at least nobody else is using him against you.
It's sort of one of those things where I don't know what, if any, effect this will have on that organization, on Vince McMahon, because I was just thinking about, yesterday I saw an ad. Shaquille O'Neal was hosting the TNT showing of the movie Justice League. And he kept talking about Papa John's because Shaquille O'Neal has been hired as the face of Papa John's Pizza. He's doing a lot of advertising for them. And he's basically the first big replacement for the actual Papa John, the guy who founded the company, John, whatever his name is, who basically got ousted as the CEO of the company because he said some racially insensitive things on a company phone call. Because he's the public face of the company, because he came across as likable and a decent guy, him saying these, basically he said the N-word. That was just enough to wreck his career. And he could no longer be the CEO of the company because he was too visible. But Vince McMahon doing this stuff, being the head of this company, potentially wrecking people's lives when everyone is at their most vulnerable to save some money. And I'm not trying to sneeze at whatever $4 million or whatever it is, but it was definitely a hit they could easily take because his reputation is so terrible. Part of me thinks like he's just going to shake this off, water off a duck's back. Do you think there's going to be any repercussions for him? Because it's been a bad year between paying a bribe to keep open, the bankruptcy of the XFL, the tone deafness of letting all these people go at such a terrible time. Are there going to be repercussions, or in a year we're all going to forget about this because, that's who he is?
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's a garbage man. That's his business. A lot. I like it. I like wrestling, but I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, he does his garbage product for people that are really like it. And personally, I don't think it's going to affect it because his what he's selling is this tough guy image, and this kind of thing in capitalism can always be played off as like, well, that's just how the business is, kid. You fire people and you keep your money, and the guy who dies with the most money wins. I do think so for him personally and his public image. I think he's probably going to be hurting a lot more from the shady stuff he's doing with the XFL and the becoming a creditor for the company and all that stuff. And they actually had some people, they always said the XFL was going to be separate from the WWE, but it turns out maybe some people were working for both companies at the same time. That's the kind of stuff that could get him into some trouble. Public image, I don't think it's going to hurt him very much. I think letting a lot of these guys go, especially when you have a hot product right now like AEW is as competition, they could absorb a lot of these guys and they could show people like, oh, this guy that McMahon didn't think anything of, we're going to make a star out of this person. Well, you've already done that with Jon Moxley, who wrestled as Dean Ambrose in the WWE. Same thing with The Undertaker. In an interview recently, he said that one reason he went to the WWE is because somebody in WCW, the other company, told him he'd never draw. So he had an axe to grind. And I think this week they laid off a lot of people that will have axes to grind. And let's say a year from now, when this thing is over with, they're probably going to have a place to go and swing that axe around a little bit. But as far as McMahon, public image-wise, I don't know that it can really get much worse for him. He's kind of a joke anytime you hear anybody talk about him. The only thing is that he has a company that makes a lot of money. It has an audience, and that audience seems to have gotten down to as small as it's going to get. There's a lot of people out there that look at the WWE as the only wrestling they will accept in the United States, and I think those people are going to be around forever, and they look at McMahon as this like tough guy, this like Trump type image of a guy who's just, he's a jerk, he's an asshole, but he's my asshole. I would hope that people would look at the number of people they laid off in the manner that they did, without helping those people out and say, okay, well, they're scumbags. But I think this kind of ties into the idea that I was losing earlier in my mind, is that a lot of these businesses, these firings that WWE did, these were things that they were probably going to naturally had in their plans, but they've hurried up and rushed into these things. So if these were people they were going to lay off over the course of the next year, doing it in one lump sum, sure, doing it all in one lump sum makes it look bad, but wrestling is kind of the product too, like I think you were getting at a second ago, that maybe 6 months down the line, a lot of people would forget this kind of thing even happened, which is unfortunate.
You can't go to a comic book convention or any sort of celebrity event or hell, even an auto show without there being 3 or 4, even more people who used to be WWF/WWE wrestlers. Gosh, every town in America has like an event at a high school or Lions Club or whatever, and they'll have some stupid name for it, as like Allegheny Strong Wrestling or whatever, and it'll have the Iron Sheik or whoever. And it'll be somebody who wrestled for them. Could be as recently as 3 weeks ago, and it could be as long as 20 years ago. All of them are out of shape, and a lot of them are broke. They're getting paid $50 a night or whatever to show up at these things. In fact, of the business, these people get cycled out. You're right. They had AEW now, which is doing pretty well and has a good business model. But so basically now there was only one place where you can make a good living off this. Now it's 1.5, because AEW has been around for 2 months. It becomes a question, is like, okay, how viable is that long term? But it's a crazy business, because I do software testing on my day job. If the company I work for goes out of business, there's a whole lot of other places that need software testing, and I can find the job. If you are a pro wrestler making, I think the base pay for that it could be low 6 figures. You get let go from that one company that's paying you $100,000. All of a sudden you're going to, okay, I'm going to work a day job at a call center and make $50 to $200 a weekend doing this. It's the drop off is insane.
It's insane. And every problem you have with your body stays with you, and your health insurance, which you don't have in the WWE, but maybe you have in another company, you're taking your pre-existing condition into that. And it's like, not only you're working for less money, the problems you had with you are much worse at probably all your other coworkers at your age. If you've broken your ribs several times and now you're working at a call center or you're a law clerk or something like that, and your night job is going to involve maybe re-injuring yourself as well.
It sucks.
It really does. I feel very sorry for everybody who got let go. Like, looking at the list of people, there's one that actually kind of sticks out. It's a guy named Rusev. And Rusev's very talented, was very popular, sold a lot of merchandise. And I think 2 days before he got let go, he gave $20,000 to a fund that he had started to help people and other people in the WWE who were not working, or maybe some like camera guys or something like that who weren't able to get all their hours in. So he puts $20,000 in so that people could get off of it. And they fire him 2 days later. There's been a very weird storyline going on with Rusev in wrestling over the last year, where he's this talented big guy, the kind of guy that Vince likes, but he's married to this beautiful woman named Lana on the shows. Well, Vince started doing a storyline where Lana was kind of like cuckold situation, and she was cheating on him with another wrestler. And then in storyline, they get a divorce. Well, it's funny because if you look at them on social media, they seem like just the two most in love people that you could ever see in the wrestling business. there's a lot of behind the scenes questioning if Vince himself was trying to get them divorced by doing this divorce angle on air. And then he goes off and fires Rusev, yet his wife still has a job with the company. When you look at stuff like that, too, it just gets even more disgusting. You got this guy going out of his way to try to do a good thing by supporting his co-workers who aren't working right now. And then just a couple days later, the company fires him. So it's just, I'm pretty sure that Vince himself doesn't believe in an afterlife or anything like that. He seems like the kind of guy who his philosophy is you do it now and today, there is no tomorrow. When he is gone, there will be a fascinating book and movie, I'm sure, at some point made about him. And if they tell the real story, the real truth of Vince McMahon, I think he will be reviled for generations to come.
It's going to be a P.T. Barnum thing. And I know they just put out the Greatest Showman, which was, you take Hugh Jackman, the most likable guy on the planet, and tell the story about how he was this great guy. P.T. Barnum was not a great guy. He bought people.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the interesting thing. It's like 100 years after his death, is he going to be this fun, irascible, likable everyman? Or is it going to be like, no, he was a terrible guy who just happened to be an industry where being the most strong-willed, terrible guy benefited him.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he's perfectly fit for that industry that he is in. And anything outside of that, not so much.
Kyle, it's been so good having you back.
This has been fun, yeah.
You and Kathleen have been missed so much. How's Kathleen doing?
She's doing very well. Fortunately, she's still working. Right now, I am taking what's called an extended video game break. And so she's very busy during the day while I do a lot of housework and stuff like that. But she is doing very well. Yeah, she's right now, I think we're making Mexican food later tonight. So I think she's meal prepping all that stuff at the moment. So
we want to have both of you back. Plug your pluggables. What else have you got going on? I know you've been working with the Dueling Genre guys.
Yes, yeah. So we started up probably a podcast that really worked out for the schedule that I had earlier this year. It worked out really well for it. We were doing a show every other week and some Patreon stuff. The show is called Theme Park This. I'm working with Scott Corelli, who is a great guy, great podcaster, and Brian Green, also fantastic podcaster. And we do a show about theme parks. But we don't just talk about news and theme park history like a lot of other podcasts do. The primary driving force of the show is that we try to come up with ideas for new rides. So we'll take like an existing IP, like say Army of Darkness, and then we'll try to figure out how we would turn that into a ride or a restaurant or some sort of themed entertainment. We do some Patreon shows as well, which if your listeners are interested, they can go to Patreon and search for Dueling Genre. And those will be like, I think every other week we do one, maybe every once a month. We do a couple different shows where we talk about theme park news, or we try to take an existing theme park idea. Like I think we got one coming up soon where we're doing the Islands of Adventure Marvel Land in Orlando and trying to say like, okay, let's say they lost the Marvel IP. What would we put in there? And we all come up with fun stuff. And it's just a fun conversation. Some guys who are into theme parks sitting around and kind of riffing on that idea. So it's, well, like I said, less hectic schedule. It's bi-weekly. It's fun. And then my wife, Kathleen, who you referred to, since the last time I was on, we actually did our own Movies by Minute podcast, which people can find at PeleMediaGroup.com, and it was of the movie Hocus Pocus. So we're both into Halloween, as we've been on the Cosmic Geppetto podcast a few years talking about our favorite horror movies, and we decided to kind of fold that into a movie that we felt a lot of love for. So that was a lot of fun to do. It was also very tiring and led to kind of a semi-retirement. So, that's people can find that at PeleMediaGroup.com if they want to check that out.
I would recommend everyone do that. Kyle, as always, it's great having you on. And we're not going to let it be so long until we have you back. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to talking to you again, Brad.
That wraps this episode of the Cosmic Geppetto podcast. Big thanks to Kyle Crane. Love all the work he has done with Pele Media and Dueling Genre Productions. He's also just a great guy. I'm always glad when he comes back. Also, big thanks to you, the listener. We at Geppetto Studios know it is a crazy time and hope we can offer distraction from it. We'd also like to know how you are dealing with the crazy. Our favorite contributors have been sharing how they are passing time during the quarantine, and no one is more favorite than you. If you want to be featured on an episode, email us an audio file that's 1 to 5 minutes long to cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net. be sure to plug your pluggables. Upcoming to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast, the Cosmic Geppettos return. This time for a Guardians of the Galaxy 2 commentary track. Till then, stay marvelous.
They say he has two gods, they say he has no fear, they say he has no eyes, they say he has no mouth, they say.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net. It's so hard for me to sit back here in this studio looking at a guy hollering my name when last year I spent more money on spilled liquor in bars from one side of this world to the other than you made. You're talking to the Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, kiss stealing, wheeling, dealing, limousine riding, jet flying son of a gun, and I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down. Woo!